I'm sure people will be trickling in as well since getting back for. And I will start with 2 minutes in my silence, so okay. As you wish. The presentation. Good afternoon. We will commence the first of our panel this afternoon in a couple of minutes. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Daniel Poulain from the University of Montreal. I am professor at the University of Montreal. I am also president of a small IT company exploiting shamelessly open data. I think I have been invited to moderate this panel this afternoon as a living proof that someone can lead a career out of open data. I have worked not with parliamentary data, but I was involved since maybe 15, maybe more, 17 years in trying to publish for free legal documents. In Canada, we have developed a site called Canly, which has now published over 1 million judicial and administrative decisions and hundreds of thousands pieces of legislation. And this huge site is now considered by 80% of the lawyers as their first source when they are looking for legal documents, legal information. So this example illustrates, I think, in a very opportune fashion, how government-produced document can lead to a significant tool change, improvement in the civil society when they are made accessible. I have personally benefited of that. I have, as I told before, I arranged my career around exploiting that bounty of data. This afternoon, we will hear two, I think I cannot say representative, but two individuals who themselves are involved in making use of open data coming out from the government and parliament in particular. I thought it opportune or correct, since we are speaking about open data, to present them, to introduce them from the data I found on the web about them. So let's start with our first speaker this afternoon, Mr. Doru Frantescu. Doru Frantescu is co-director of VoteWatch, an organization set to promote greater transparency and better debates in the EU, European Union. Doru is based in Brussels and leads the development of VoteWatch EU website, which monitor EU decision makers' voting records and provides complex analysis of voting behavior in the European Parliament. Prior to that, Doru has designed a series of e-democracy tools which help voters compare their views to those of the candidates in parliamentary and presidential election. Doru has a political science and journalism background and has worked extensively in the civil society. I found exactly the same information on the LinkedIn page, but it's somewhat more complete. Here we can find a list of Mr. Frantescu interests. Mr. Frantescu is interested by politics, sociology, history, football, foreign languages and cultures, and women. So let's hear Mr. Doru Frantescu.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is to try to change a little bit the perspective that we're looking at the open data from, meaning that I will, together with my colleague from the Silent Foundation, try to show how how civil society organizations use the open data. So what is it that we take from the parliaments? What is it that we do with it? What is it that we present the citizens, and how the citizens and other stakeholders and academia use the information that we provide in order to complete their projects? So I entitled my presentation, The State of Play at the EU level. This means that we're handling information that regards the European Union level. That is what the politicians from the 27 member states of the European Union do in Brussels. And we're not handling the information from the level of the member states, but only what's in Brussels. We are a not-for-profit organization. And what we created is an application that handles the activity of 754 members of the European Parliament, which come, as I said, from 27 EU member states. This is important because I believe this is a clear opportunity for benchmarking between countries. So we have parliamentarians coming from various member states, from 27 states. They speak 23 official languages of the European Union, but they work in the same legislative body, which provides an opportunity for the parliamentary monitoring organizations, for the journalists, and for everyone who is interested to see how different individuals coming from different cultures behave in the same conditions. Also, starting with June this year, we will monitor the activity of the second chamber of the European Union, meaning the Council of Ministers, where the governments of the 27 member states gather and vote on the legislation for the 27 states. I also thought that it is important to emphasize a little bit the composition of our team, because it's a very mixed one. And as you can see, it comprises not only civil society activists as myself, but also a combination of former EU-level politicians, so former members of the European Parliament, former top civil servants in the institutions. It is the former Secretary General of the European Parliament who has recently joined our ranks. Also academia, mainly based in the UK at the London School of Economics. Professor Simon Hicks is the chairman of our organization. And of course, we rely on the support of a very experienced IT team who does most of the work in dealing with the parliamentary data. They have an experience of over 6 years in handling this type of data. What is it that we present to the public? First of all, we present information on the individual activity of members of the parliament, such as the votes. And here it is important to note that we show how members of the European Parliament voted not only on the final votes, but also on separate votes, meaning key amendments within the text or paragraphs whenever the votes are split. So we can say exactly who voted how on important items in the legislation, because at the level of the final vote, there are many instances where the political groups vote the same way. So everybody votes in favor at the final vote. But it is important to understand that the stakes may have been at a certain key amendment. Of course, we present information on the attendance of the members of the European Parliament, but also on what type of amendments they drafted to the proposals. So we pretty much know, and we show that to the citizens, who amended what and in what direction. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of the types of information that we handle. So what is it that we take from the European Parliament, and how is it that we provide this information to the citizens? And this is a screenshot from the European Parliament's website showing the types of files that we handle. So you see the attendance list, which is a HTML file. I'm going to show you right away how it looks like. And then the results of votes and the roll call votes, which are PDF files. And this is how they look. We're looking at an HTML document which presents the attendance list, so who among the members of the European Parliament attended a certain day of plenary session. As you can see, there's a list of members of the European Parliament by their last name, separated by a comma and a space. But nothing regarding the country that they come from or the European political group that they belong to. Therefore, it is very difficult for an ordinary citizen to spot the parliamentarian that he or she is interested in. This is another HTML file that concerns the agenda of the parliament. Again, this is something that we need to collect manually, because there is no way that we can create software that can read the title of the proposal and the other details and put it together with the votes. And I'm going to show you why. We're now looking at the inside of a PDF document that shows the subject of the votes in the European Parliament's plenary. And you see that this is quite difficult to read automatically for those of you who have done this. The information here is not very consistent. And it's very difficult to program a software to understand everything that is here. Here you also see the list of votes, so how members of the European Parliament voted on a certain proposal. Again, you only see the name of the political group that they belong to, ALDE or ECR, and then a list of names separated by a comma and a space. Again, if you're an ordinary citizen and you're interested to see how the members of the parliament coming from your constituency voted, it is very difficult to track them. Okay, you can do it by Control F, but then you need to spend a lot of time to find them. And this is how we present this data. After we have read the HTML and PDF files, we have processed this information, we have uploaded it onto the website, and here the people can see how members of the parliament belonging to a certain political group, you see a column for the political group, a column for the member state that they belong to, and then how they voted, whether in favor or against, or if they were absent or they were present but they didn't press the buttons, so they didn't vote. We also show a type of information that for sure the European Parliament or other parliament in the world would not be willing due to institutional constraints to provide, such as whether that parliamentarian has voted in accordance with the political line of the group that he or she belongs to or not. So whether he or she was loyal or rebel. As I said, we also provide information on the amendments that each parliamentarian has drafted to any piece of legislation that has gone through the European Parliament. And you can see an example here of a lady MEP who has amended a number of proposals. And if the user tracks forward, clicking on the name of the report, can see exactly what is the text of the amendment that the lady MEP drafted to that particular proposal. And then we provide aggregate information. Here we see, for example, a list of the 7 political groups in the European Parliament, and we try to match them to see who votes with whom. So what are the coalition patterns between the political groups in the House? And we have taken for this example the ALDE group, the Liberal and Democrat group in the Parliament to see to what extent their political line matched that of the other political groups in the House and in a certain policy area, because this information can also be broken down by the 20 policy areas. And in this particular case of the civil liberties, justice, and home affairs, the Liberals have had the same voting options as the Socialist group, the S&D group, in 79% of the votes, and then the Greens, and so on. So that people can see exactly what is the relation between the political groups in the House. This is important because at the level of the European Union, there is no stable majority versus opposition system. Therefore, you don't know exactly who in the House is in majority and who is in opposition, because representatives of all of the political groups are in the executive. We also try to measure the level of the cohesion of the European political groups. This is important because we try to understand how parliamentarians behave, whether they base their voting option more on the nationality or more on the ideology. And for example, this graph shows on a scale from 0 to 1, where 1 is the maximum and 0 is obviously the minimum, that the level of cohesion of the European political groups is quite high. My understanding is that it's even higher than that of Republicans and Democrats in the US Congress, meaning that members of the European Parliament tend to vote much more on ideological line than on national line, which is an important conclusion, because there are many people in the European Union who argue that nationality matters a lot and the Union will never be united. As I said, there are also a lot of opportunities for making benchmarking between the countries, and here is one example, is one that the members of the European Parliament don't necessarily like it very much, because it regards their attendance to the sessions. And as you can see, we made a ranking of the countries by this indicator. And in the current legislature, there isn't that much difference between the first and the last, with the Austrians being the first in terms of attendance and the British MEPs the last for now. In the previous legislature, however, there was a big difference between some countries and other countries. And now, who uses the application that we have created? First of all, we started in 2009, prior to the European elections back then, and since then we have managed to count about 100,000 quotations on the web. In the last month, we had over 50,000 direct visits on the website. I'm saying direct visits because there are also visits to the blogs and the websites that report on our information. Whenever there is something more controversial going through the Parliament, the traffic increases. Nowadays, it's the ACTA agreement, which has generated a lot of interest because it is the European Parliament that has to ratify this agreement at international level. And as you have seen, there were a lot of manifestations in some of the member states of the European Union. And people were interested to see what is the voting record of the members of the European Parliament to try to understand how they will vote when this agreement will come for ratification in the European Parliament. The issue is even more important because the balance of power between the forces who want ACTA and those who don't want ACTA is very balanced right now in the European Parliament. There is a margin of 10 votes that will decide, so 10 swing voters. And then, of course, there are the journalists in both those in Brussels and in the 27 member states. And then the academia. There are a number of articles and books that have been using our data in trying to describe how the EU institutions work and how to work with the institution. But then it is the European Parliament and the members of the European Parliament themselves. This is a picture from a debate that we have organized last month when a new president of the European Parliament was elected. We organized a debate between the three candidates to this position. And in this particular case, we have also drafted a report showing the political record of these three candidates, particularly how they voted on key issues. And also it is the European Parliament who has been kind enough, as you see in this screenshot, to place the logo of VoteWatch on its website because it has recognized the complementarity of our work to what they have been struggling to provide. So my understanding is that the European Parliament thinks that there are some pieces of information or perspectives of presenting the information that they wouldn't be able to provide to the public, and therefore the work that we do is complementary to what they're showing. We're also thinking of the next steps, and this is one tool that we have recently created on our website. It's called Vote Match, and it does what it says. It matches the votes of the citizens with those of the members of the European Parliament. So the users come to the website and goes through a set of key votes and votes in favor or against, and then chooses the level of importance that that issue has to the particular citizen. And then the system automatically compares the vote of the citizen with the votes of all members of the European Parliament, and see who match your view and who doesn't. At the end of this quiz, the citizen is able to see which members of the parliament best match or worst match their political views. So if in the morning there was a question, what are the benefits to democracy, I strongly believe that one of the benefits of open data to democracy is the fact that citizens are able to understand exactly who represents their interests and who doesn't represent their interests. Because it's one thing to listen to what the politicians say, and it's another thing to compare your views with their views directly. There are many instances where obviously the words in the speeches of the MEPs don't match their facts in the parliament. Well, this kind of tool helps you go deeper. We're also now working on a number of applications which will feed the information via the social networks and the mobile devices. And let's look at the challenges that we face. So we're handling the two chambers at the European level. First of all, the European Parliament. We have a number of technical challenges. The XML data is yet to be made available by the European Parliament. We have discussions with the Parliament, and they have promised that to deliver this information in an XML format. They haven't so far. So far we have to deal with PDF and HTML files. From the point of view of the political challenges, so far we are only able to report on the votes in the plenary. We are not able to report on the votes in the committees because this information is not yet made available by the European Parliament. In the plenary, however, we, as I've shown, are able to report on how members of the Parliament voted, how individual members, so who voted what on each piece of legislation. In the committees, however, the situation is different, and most of, or a good part of the European legislation is decided in the committees. There are hopes, however, that by the end of this year we will be able to report on that too, meaning that the European Parliament will start voting by roll call in the committees. With the other legislative chamber, the Council of the European Union, the situation is even more difficult because this institution has more departments. The Council of the European Union consists actually in 10 configurations for each of the policy areas, so agriculture, energy, and so on. And these departments work independently from one another, and there is a lot of miscoordination between them. The result of their miscoordination is that the documents that the public needs are published with huge delays of weeks or even months. So in order to have the minutes to see what was discussed and what was voted in the Council of Ministers, you need to wait for a number of weeks and in some cases months. From the technical point of view also, our team needs to collect a lot of information manually, so with copy-pasting from the PDF files and then placing it into the databases. So the conclusion from that is that we need to spend a lot of time collecting this information. We need to hire personnel to do copy-paste activities, which are not very fun. And my thinking is that if the parliaments around the world would be able to provide this information in a much readable, machine-readable way, we have more time to analyze and to communicate this information to the public. And as someone in the morning was saying, that NGOs should also educate the people, should also teach the people what the information that we provide means. So if we had more time to do that, it would be great. But that means also that we need to spend less time to collect manually the data, and we can only do that if the parliaments provided this information in a database way. So I also have some proposals at a global level, and I think that it wouldn't be bad if a parliamentary transparency index could be created at a global level, showing the best practices in each of the parliaments, because I think the discussions so far have been too abstract. Every parliament thinks that all the information that the citizens want is there, but in reality you can only understand what each of the parliaments publish if you go category by category. You know very well that the devil is in the details. And I think that a parliamentary transparency observatory, an online one, could be set up to monitor the evolutions, the best practices in each country, but also the involutions when this happen. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doru. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Daniel Schuman. Daniel Schuman is the Sunlight Foundation's Policy Council and Director of the Advisory Committee on Transparency. He works to develop policy that further Sunlight's mission of catalyzing greater government openness and transparency. And Mr. Schuman is director of the Advisory Committee on Transparency at the Sunlight Foundation. So please hear Mr. Schuman.
Could you tell that the biography was written by our communications office by any chance? No. So good afternoon, and thank you for the kind introduction. Again, my name is Daniel Schuman, and I am an attorney with the Sunlight Foundation. The Sunlight Foundation is a civil society organization that advocates for greater government transparency. We believe that public information held by the government should be available online, in real time, and in machine-readable formats. I'd like to congratulate the House of Representatives, the Interparliamentary Union, and the United Nations for hosting such an important conversation, and also thank you to the Global Center for ICT and Parliament, whose hard work has made this conversation possible. The focus of this panel discussion and my remarks are on increasing the public's access to parliamentary information. In particular, I will explore the collaborative relationship between parliaments and civil society organizations in increasing government transparency. I will also explore how open document standards can help support this partnership. Perhaps the best place to start is the current state of legislative transparency. Now, we've already heard about some of the great work that's being done I'd say abroad, but that's probably a very parochial perspective, certainly in other countries. But I'm most familiar with the American context, so I'm going to start there. The United States Congress created an online legislative information system known as THOMAS in the mid-1990s. THOMAS contains the text and summaries of legislation. It identifies legislative sponsors and amendment authors. It provides an outline of a bill's legislative path as well as transcripts of floor debates, and it contains other related information. THOMAS has nearly 1 million visits each month, according to the Library of Congress. But many more people use THOMAS's legislative data than the library's usage statistics reflect. For example, 2 civil society legislative information websites together have nearly double the number of visits per month as THOMAS. These sites repackage legislative data in more user-friendly ways and add additional legislative and contextual information. There are other privately created, commonly used websites and mobile apps that are used by hundreds of thousands of people. If our goal is to increase public access to parliamentary information, we must start by acknowledging that civil society organizations and others, and not the government, are already where the majority of Americans turn for legislative information. These privately created sites are more flexible, oftentimes they're more innovative, and they don't cost the government a penny to develop. This trend is not limited here to the United States. But while non-governmental actors are the primary, or the main conduit at least, through which the public accesses legislative information, that access is dependent upon government making its work product freely available online and in machine-readable formats. When online publication is compromised, civil society organizations and others step in to fill the void, but they can never entirely replace the government's role as author and distributor of legislative information. And when governments do not release legislative information to the public at all, or they do so poorly, they prompt the creation of secondary markets where government data leaks out to the public, but at a high cost. This creates information asymmetries where those with the greatest financial resources have significantly greater access to basic information about the government's activities. This in turn creates a feedback loop where those with the resources to gather information about what the government is doing are in a privileged position to influence its activities. In a democratic system, this information symmetry cannot be allowed to flourish. There is, of course, a better way. To the largest extent possible, government information should be made available to the public. There must be a presumption of openness. And the category of publicly available legislative information should be construed as broadly as possible. Legislative information clearly includes the text of legislation and transcripts of floor debates. It also includes information about how legislation changes as it moves through the legislative process. It includes proposals for amending legislation, expert analyses performed by parliamentary research services, and reports from executive branch agencies. And it includes schedules of committee hearings and floor debates, live video proceedings, and in vote counts. I'm sure in this room we could probably come up with more things to add to this list as well. We do not have real openness when this information is made available to the public, but only in obscure ways. To maintain legislative information as paper records in an archive that is rarely open to the public and that is difficult to access is to promote information asymmetries. We have all come, at least I hope, that we have all come to the conclusion that online publication is the most effective means to share information with the public. But poor online publication practices can have the effect of thwarting transparency. The Sunlight Foundation, building on the efforts of others, has identified principles to evaluate whether electronically stored government data is being properly made available for public use. These principles fall into 3 broad categories: data quality, data access, and data transformation and reuse. To evaluate legislative data quality, it's important to assess 1, whether the information is complete, 2, whether it draws upon primary source data, and 3, whether it is permanently available. A data set is complete when it reflects the entirety of what is recorded about a particular subject. This allows users to examine the scope of information made available and to examine data items at the greatest level of detail. Generally speaking, all raw information from a data set should be released to the public, as well as metadata that defines and explains the raw data. Primary source data is the information originally collected by the government. It should be released whenever possible to allow users to verify that information was collected properly and recorded accurately. Permanent data availability, which is not as easy to say as it is to do, I hope, means that once information is released by the government, it is available forever in a findable location. The ongoing availability of data allows for its authenticity to be checked. Users can check their data against the original source to make sure they have the most up-to-date information and that it has not been corrupted. Having looked at data quality, let's move on to data accessibility. Data accessibility can be evaluated on the basis of 1, who can obtain the information, 2, how they must obtain it, 3, where they can access it, and finally, whether they must pay any fees to do so. Any person should be able to access legislative data at any time without having to submit identification or justify what it's being used for. While administrators often set up barriers to access, including registration or membership requirements, these barriers are generally unnecessary and should be avoided. Similarly, in ideal circumstances, accessing data should require only a trivial amount of effort. The best ways to make information in a database publicly available are to provide online access through APIs and bulk downloads. An API, of course, allows a computer to ask for a specific data item, and bulk access provides a copy of the entire database for download. Of course, it's often useful and appropriate to have a browser-based way of accessing the information as well, but that's no substitute for the ability to download all of the information at once. Datasets collected by the government should be released to the public as quickly as possible, and priority should be given to data that's usefulness is time-sensitive. There should also be no charge to access public data. While there are many reasons given for imposing fees, the reality is that the information has already been paid for by the public and that even small fees can significantly chill access. While it is tempting to impose costs on the public, all too often this is a pretext to suppress public access, especially when the data can be viewed as politically sensitive. The result here, again, is an information asymmetry that benefits those with the greatest financial resources and the greatest political pull. Having now looked at data accessibility, let's move on to data use and transformation. When legislative data can be used or transformed for other uses, or let me rephrase, whether it can be used or transformed for other uses, can be examined by looking at a couple of things. Whether there are licensing requirements, whether the data is machine readable, and if it is recorded in an open standard format. Licensing requirements, including the all too common Crown copyright, are unnecessary barriers to public use of data. Public information should be labeled as a work of the government that is available without restriction and is part of the public domain. The additions of dissemination restrictions, attribution requirements, and so on unnecessarily limit the public's ability to evaluate and make use of legislative information. Machine readability, which is the ability of computers to process data, is also incredibly important. In our modern era, nearly all information is created in a digital format, and the small amount of information that is not born digital is or should be quickly adopted into an electronic format. Data should be stored in widely used formats that easily lend themselves to machine processing. Handwritten notes cannot be understood by computers, and scanning documents via optical character recognition results in many errors. The widely used PDF format, while adequate for displaying documents, makes it very difficult for computers to extract the underlying information. When other factors require the use of difficult-to-parse formats like PDFs, the data should also be made available in a machine-friendly format. And let me add, as an aside, that the consistent use of unique entity identification numbers, also, easier to do than to say, across data sets, such as the ability to identify legislators and bills, makes it much easier to analyze and sort information. Data should be stored in an open standard format, which refers to who owns the format in which the data is stored. The purpose here is to make data available to as many potential users as possible. Ideally, data should be stored in a format that any person can access without having to purchase a software license and can be processed by commonly available programs. There's nothing wrong with publishing information in a proprietary standard, as well as so long as it is also equally available in an open standard. In summary, when parliaments evaluate how they make information available to the public in terms of data quality, data access, and ease of data transformation and reuse, they take a significant step forward towards empowering civil society and the public at large. The United States House of Representatives, for example, is taking a significant step towards greater transparency as we speak. We heard about some of their efforts this morning. The House is publishing more data online as it is created. It also recently created a one-stop portal for access to large amounts of legislative data, and it established consistent ways of identifying different types of legislative data sets. While there is clearly more work to do, there can be no doubt that the House of Representatives is making significant progress. For any parliament looking to increase public access to legislative information, I have 4 common sense suggestions. Now, many people in this room have already gone far beyond what these recommendations entail, but I think that it's worth going over them. First, I would recommend that any parliament perform a legislative information audit. Determine what types of legislative information you create, what you collect, and how and where it is collected. See whether it's released to the public, and if so, what formats are used. Second, I recommend bringing together all the people responsible for creating and collecting legislative data with those outside the government that make use of it. Set up a working group that meets regularly to discuss issues of information collection and dissemination. Its first order of business should be to review the Legislative Information Survey. Not all of this work can be done with civil society organizations in the room, but much of it can, and you will benefit from their presence. Third, publish whatever legislative information you have online, subject only to narrowly tailored restrictions for confidential legislative work product and sensitive personal information. Even if the information is not perfectly formatted when it's released to the public, it's better to make information available right now than to wait for perfection that may never come. The civil society organizations, like the one just spoke to my left, will be able to steer you towards where you should devote more effort to releasing better formed data sets and help to point out the flaws in the data that you've released. This kind of iterative effort should be welcomed and encouraged. And finally, make a plan to improve the quality, accessibility, and reusability of the information that you're releasing. In the short term, how data is released will depend largely on existing internal procedures, but over time, parliamentary processes themselves may be adapted to meet the emerging needs of parliamentarians and the general public. Publishing legislative information online holds forth the promise of rejuvenating public engagement in our political systems. This experiment is already underway, so we need to give it our best effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So we've heard in turn very nice, very convincing illustration of what can be done with open data, and then Daniel presented a program of what could be the action of government and what could be the principle to guide that action. So maybe to start the discussion, we can keep our attention on what the government can do and what is not yet achieved to make the civil society use of the information. Then I would say later on we could turn our attention to the other part of the dialogue, because now we are, let's say, looking at what could be the information coming out of the government toward the society. And I think in the second time, in a couple of minutes, we can try to think and to discuss about what the civil society can say to the government when they have all that information. So any reaction to the presentation of our 2 speakers? Yes, sir. I would like to ask you, when you're speaking, just to give your name and your affiliation, sir.
Yes, thank you. Mauro Fioroni from the Italian Senate. I have just a question to Doru Frantescu. I would like to know if you have any connection with other similar experience in other countries, like the work for you, I think, in the UK or Open Parliament in Italy. And if another question, the original idea to watch and to monitor European member of the European Parliament behavior, the original idea, who is the original, who decided to watch and with the where the resources comes from. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start with the resources. I understand that you mean the financial resources. So the money that we get come from Foundations for Democracy. We don't have a financial relation with the European Parliament or the other governmental organizations. We are funded by private foundations only, at least so far. This is the policy so far. With regard to the original idea, I think there are more ideas that have come together. As I've shown, the team is a mixture of people who have worked in the civil society, people who have strong IT background, people who have done research for many, many years in the academia, and people who have been involved in politics. So this is the result of a joint thinking from this perspective. Myself, I have a background in the civil society, so I have been active from this bottom-up perspective, whereas the others came with the academia expertise and others. With regard to the relation with the other organizations in Europe, yes, we have met some of them. We haven't met particularly someone from Italy so far, but I can tell you for sure that there are a lot of requests from citizens and NGOs and journalists in Italy who want to know more about the activity of their members of the European Parliament. And whenever they're looking for some votes or some activities and they don't find directly on the website, they write us. Therefore, we know for sure that there are many people in Italy interested. Whereas for the other organizations in the member states, we're obviously trying to connect these organizations and to centralize somehow the information. We don't know exactly what's available at the level of each of the 27 member states for now. I personally know what is the situation in about 7 or 8 member states, but this has to be centralized. And this, as I said, what can be built at the European level, but also at global level, is a tool in which you can track the exact evolutions of the parliamentary open data standards in each of the countries, checking boxes whenever something changes, meaning whenever a parliament decides to provide new categories of information, such as the votes in the committees that we're fighting for, or something new, the others in the network should know and should be able to provide advice to the parliamentary monitoring organization that is handling that parliament on how to benefit more from that.
Thank you. Just a last technical question, if you don't mind. How you said that you work manually, part of the data. You don't any other technical tool for instance, scraping by the web pages of the European Union website? Do you use this technique to catch the data?
Okay, so the work is done partly manually, partly automatically. There are some programs that indeed read specific pages of the European Parliament website and collect the information such as on the activity on the speeches, activities such as speeches, parliamentary questions, the amendments. These are collected automatically. Other pieces of information, however, have to be handled manually. For example, the subject of the votes, as I've shown, these are put in PDF files, and you cannot reliably use a machine for that. You have to do copy-paste to see exactly what the number of the amendment was, or what the number of the paragraph was. the situation is too complicated sometimes, with some paragraphs being voted in different parts, and you don't know exactly what was voted there. So this has to be dealt with manually. Also because the European Parliament hasn't been able to provide this information in a more readable way so far, but as I said, we're discussing with them, and it is possible that in the next few months the situation changes a little bit. But I would like to underline one point here. The fact that we collect part of the information manually also increases the risk of mistakes, obviously. And this is something that the Parliament should be worried about that too, because if we provide the wrong information, then everybody has to lose, including the Parliament and the trust of the citizens in the Parliament, even if it is the fault of an intermediary, can decrease.
Okay, and we have a similar problem in the U.S., both on the federal level and on the state level, where the Sunlight Foundation is scraping data from 47 of the 50 state legislatures and making it available in bulk. Now, some of them actually make it available in useful formats, but many of them have required just what's going on in Europe. Scrapers that are built that break over time as parliaments change the way they display information. That if there is an error that's initially released by the parliamentary body, we will ingest without necessarily realizing there's a problem. If they go back and fix it, we won't necessarily realize that's been fixed either. We try to go through and catch those problems, and we also try to validate the data against what we already know to see, if there are errors. But the legislatures generally don't make it easy to give them feedback back to say, hey, by the way, you've broken your own legislation. You're displaying something that's improper. There's an inherent delay in the process of gathering the information as well. And this is on the federal level, where we rely on another entity called GovTrack that goes and scrapes all of the legislative data from Thomas, which doesn't provide it in bulk, and also from all these different states. So this is an endemic problem that many legislatures, for whatever reason, are forcing those of us who want to use that data to go and sort of put together Rube Goldberg devices to try to get at the information.
First is you, Tom.
Thank you. My name is Tom Spangler. I'm the CEO, co-founder of a company called Granicus. I'm interested, I heard both of you guys talk about scraping data and the challenges with that, right? The inaccuracies and the manual process and the cost, I think some of the legislatures talked about. We also heard earlier talking about the infrastructure that underlies, how government runs. Have you guys seen, and have you been able to communicate, I think, to this group especially, the ability to build the transparency in the data into the systems they actually use to do the work? So when you vote on your voting system, it actually creates that data as a feed that's available out to the rest of the world, so we don't have to separate the tools we use to do our work in a public meeting or in the legislative process with the tools and the process to create the transparency.
Thank you. The other gentleman behind. Yes.
Hi. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to throw three of them.
I think your name is Soufiane.
Soufiane, yes, thank you. I'm from the House of Commons, Canada, and I suppose you are non-for-profit organization or NGOs, what we call non-governmental organizations. And we have a couple in Canada also, and we're very grateful because one of the questions we heard this morning, how we measure success, and for me, measuring success is more of you reusing our content. But I think there is the question is, what role can you play? Because you are asking, give me more, I'm scraping. You are doing things that nobody knows about, and suddenly we discover that you are doing that, and you are calling us, say, well, you broke my system because you made a change. Well, I don't even know that you existed. The question is, what kind of role can you play to establish standards for us to obey too, to share data with you? I heard votes. Are you willing to take the lead and create an international standard, XML standard called VoteML, that all the parliament will disseminate their information in it, because you are the only one who can play this role. And what are the networks that you have with your peers in the same countries and all over the world? We have very talented people in Canada working in isolation, and I wish they communicate with you and exchange a lot of their knowledge and platforms. The other day, I'm preparing for this conference. I've made a search on Google and discovered that a lot of people developed literally scripts and systems to scrape our website, when all our website contain the XML, and there is a whole section to describe how to use it, okay, and say, there is a problem from our side from communicating that, and I think that's another role that you can play. I'm going to stop here, and how can you help?
Thank you. The lady there.
Actually, I have a comment, and is that all right now?
Your name?
Oh, thank you. Sarah Schott. I'm Executive Director of Knowledge as Power. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in the United States, and I believe we're the first service in the United States to utilize a full legislative XML feed from both parliamentary bodies from a state legislature, from Washington State, and launched our services at capcitizen.org. And to your question, and responding a bit to Daniel's eloquent words, I think we are in a good position, the civil society groups, to be a resource for governments. Certainly some of the things that we've tried to do at Knowledge as Power have included doing a usability study for the city of Seattle, which helped them redesign their website, release their information in an easier way, and that led to them becoming known as, or being rated as the top municipal website in the United States in 2011. And then working with various governments to just educate them on standards if they're not currently using them. So we're hosting a training on March 1st here in DC on Akano and Toso. There's a range of things that groups like Knowledge as Power and Sunlight and others are doing. I think we're well positioned to be these nonpartisan resources for legislative bodies. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes there's been this adversarial type relationship. Sometimes I talk with clerks who feel like their work is validated by the number of hits they receive to their website, and they worry that their work is going to be diluted by other organizations having legislative information elsewhere, and it's absolutely not the case. I don't think anything could dilute the work of public servants who are working to open up our process and make it modern. But there, I think we need to be approaching you just as often as you're approaching us. And I think in Canada, we see a lot of Canadian governments at OpenGov West, our open government conferences, and it's been inspiring to me to see the range of governments working collaboratively, including the province of British Columbia, to open up legislative information.
Thank you, Sarah. Tom Bruce.
Hi, I'm Tom Bruce. I'm the director of the Legal Information Institute at Cornell. This is really a policy question. There's been a lot of thinking in the United States lately about where exactly government's role is with respect to bulk data, not just to provide it, but to, in effect, provide it in lieu of providing fully developed services, right? The thought is that government puts the bulk data out there, private innovators, be they zero cost or lots of cost, develop products and services, and government then stays out of it together. That's one extreme school of thought. I'm curious to know how we would balance at this point. There's a lot of thought. Well, that maybe this isn't such a bad idea. Maybe if we let those crazy people out in the public sector do this, that gives us a lot of budget relief. We don't have to develop all that stuff. And knowing for myself, as someone who's been doing this from one institutional base for 20 years, just how fragile that institutional base is, I wonder if there is not some call on government to also provide developed services, and where exactly you would draw that line.
Thank you very much. So some reaction?
Okay, so there were a number of questions. I hope I get them all. So Tom, you had asked about building transparency into the data to start? I mean, that's sort of my summary of your question. And the answer is yes, it should be, and oftentimes it is, and then that data is stripped out before it's made available to the public. And it makes me pull my hair out when I find out about that happening, and it happens often. I could list, and I won't, out of deference to some of my colleagues in this room, but I could list 5 examples of where that's happening right now with House of Representatives legislative data, and it is incredibly frustrating, and there's no need for it. So oftentimes that data is already baked in to begin with, and if so, so long as it doesn't compromise, you know, like I wouldn't want to see the edits that a member office is making to a bill as it's being drafted. That's not appropriate. But once it's finished, you know, it should be available with as much, you know, markup and data that goes along with it as possible. Going to, and I'm not going to get your name right. I apologize. It's like Sufyan. You had sort of 3 related questions. First of all, I was in Ottawa just 2 years ago, speaking at a conference held by your NGO compatriots at one of the schools there, and it was one of the things that fascinated me the most was, you know, our friends from the United Kingdom were talking about the ability to have a welcoming parliament. Well, that morning I was able to walk in and get a tour of the Canadian Parliament, and I thought that was wonderful. So, discoverability of NGOs. Well, first of all, hi. So, at least for my role and a lot of others, we spend a lot of time trying to contact folks inside government. We have networks with other people. There are listservs. So Sunlight Foundation runs 2 listservs. One's a policy listserv. One is a lab technology listserv. What's called Sunlight. It's called the Open House Project and Sunlight Labs, where people from all over the world discover each other. There is a similar list run by My Society in the UK that also brings together a lot of folks. What I would suggest as a starting point is when you see people developing these sites or these products, give them a call. Invite them into the room. They will immediately tell their friends that this is going on. You know, one of the main points that I was trying to make in the recommendations at the end was just quite simply, it's important to have conversation, not just with those inside the government, but also with those outside. And you know, many of us are spending a lot of time trying to beat down the door to meet folks like those who are in this room today. We're more than happy to meet you halfway. You set up a listserv. You can invite us into meetings, whatever you want. We're happy to have this kind of a conversation. In terms of establishing standards, well, that's a bit more of a tricky question. And basically, a lot of these standards are being established by fiat. So a sort of interesting example, in the U.S. legislative context, we have a problem, just like in the European example, where who is this member of Congress? Who is John Smith? There were probably 50 John Smiths in the last 230 years. Well, there's also maintained a directory of all members of Congress with short biographies, and there's a little number at the end of each of those web pages. That's a way of uniquely referencing each of those members. Now, the House hadn't adopted and the Senate hadn't adopted that as a standard to put into their legislative data, but we started using that in Open Congress and in GovTrack and other places as a way of uniquely identifying the members, and the House has actually just adopted that as their standard, as a way of trying to talk about, you know, a particular member of Congress. So what I would suggest, you know, we often see attempts to create standards that require bringing everybody into the room at the same time. We're all going to sit together and we're going to figure out this is how we talk about X. And that doesn't often work. So my suggestion is try to look at what's already being done in the wild and build off of that to the extent that's possible. We already talked about networking. Oh, in Sunlight and NDI we'll having a conference, I think, next month that will bring together international and domestic transparency folks to talk about a lot of the questions that are being addressed here today. And I think Tom Bruce is putting on something along these lines in October up at Cornell that he can talk about as well. I don't have anything to add to what Sarah said, which I think was very well said. And finally, Tom's question is, So where is the line between the government's role with respect to bulk data and websites? I think, is that a fair summary? Okay. So there are different schools of thought on this. My opinion is that the government should not get out of the business of running websites. They can't. But at the same time, there is no way that a government website can do everything. And even if they could do everything, there are a lot of things that they probably should not do. So where is that line? Well, I mean, the line is always going to be where it has to be, which is based on resource constraints that are for the parliament. But the marginal cost of making data available in bulk means that, again, to the maximum extent possible, information should be made available that way. Do you want to jump in, Tom? Okay.
Sure. I just worry that sometimes those of us in the open access community have been a little quick to jump in and relieve government of its responsibility. Oh,
I agree. Well, and there's a huge piece to that as well, which is our executive director at the Sunlight Foundation is an incredibly effective fundraiser. She is tremendously effective. And I hope that she is with Sunlight for the next 50 years. But she's not going to be. Private sector funding for these types of efforts are always contingent. And it would be a shame if any of us in the NGO world go away because of a lack of funding, particularly when parliaments are relying on us to provide vital services for them. So there is definitely a balance that needs to be struck there. And I have a lot of answers, but I don't have an answer to how to do that. So.
Yeah, thanks. So first, with regard to increasing the transparency and the speed of reporting of the information, yes, ideally, the civil society organization should be allowed to connect themselves to the machines in the voting room so that, well, immediately, so a few seconds after a vote has been taken place in that plenary or the committee, the information should already be posted on the website of a civil society organization. In practice, this is difficult due to reasons of security, because, at least from our experience with the European Parliament has said that this is not really possible, because once you connect to this system in the plenary, whatever goes out can also come in, meaning that someone, if the system is broken into, can inject information, which is obviously not very good. But what can be done is that this information can be published in a database format in an XML very fast after the vote has been taken place in another place. So, for example, in the discussions that we have with the European Parliament, they promise to put this information to send it to us by email, but by an automatic email with the XML files, which takes some time. Let's see how much it takes. Right now, we report the information on the votes with a delay of about 5 hours from the moment the vote has taken place in the plenary. So this long, it takes the European Parliament about 3 hours to publish the PDF on their website, and it takes us an additional 2 hours to process the information, also depending on the amount of votes. This is how it works. How can NGOs help? Well, I think the answer is not that complicated here. I think that every parliament in a democratic country should constitute a working group in which to invite the organizations dealing with parliamentary data and the media and whoever else is interested, and see what they ask for and what can be done. Unfortunately, I find more and more that the parliaments are not very keen on consulting the civil society organizations whenever they want to change their rules of procedures with regard to transparency, or whenever they want to do something new. For example, the European Parliament has changed their website a few months ago, which generated a lot of discomfort in our team, because we have had to redo our scrapers and everything. Who should take the lead for the standardization of standards at the global level? Maybe I'm not in position to talk about the global level. I'm in position to talk about the European level, and we can take the lead in doing that, provided that we have the resources. We are hoping to get more resources in the next few years between now and the European elections in 2014. to be able to engage more the NGOs in the member states. But also talking about harmonization of the data sets, I remember that I have a personal experience. Some of you, maybe here in the States, you know the project Vote World, which is run by Berkeley University. So they have gathered the data from 20-something parliaments. I think it's 25 parliaments. And they've asked us, so myself and the team that I'm running, to work with this data. On this occasion, we have noticed that there were an important number of discrepancies between the data in the 25 parliaments around the world, even though they were not, this data was not scraped from the websites of these parliaments, but it was collected by researchers. So I'm talking about roll call data here. But with some work, we have been able to standardize that data and to harmonize the information, the fields, with regard to the votes, and you can now watch it on the Vote World website. We just placed it there 2 weeks ago. Okay, I think this is it for now.
Yes, just before letting you intervene, I just want to bring to your attention that the theme of that session here is a dialogue, the dialogue with the civil society. And I think that until now we have mainly our attention was set on what we can extract or what we can get with better format, with better practices from government. I wonder if the speakers and also any participant, you are all specialists and involved in Parliament, if you have any idea about how you will manage the information flow going in the other direction. I think that, if you ask people, because earlier this morning, Mr. John Pullinger from the House of Commons mentioned that, the aims of his activity was to inform people, promote parliament activity, and then to listen to people. So I wonder if there's not big challenges on that side too. Like, let's say, if you were to receive large volume of information from the citizen, and with let's say in the course of a campaign against a piece of legislation, and how do you manage that? The modest communication from someone who tried to reach out toward his representative to tell her or him his opinion among a huge campaign with, let's say, hundreds of thousands of emails. How do you manage those things? And also, okay, I'm not used to that. Okay, so is there also some sort of negative side to this? Could making the very small detail of democratic life accessible to be treated by computer process, could this change the way that our democratic institutions work? Okay, it could help, probably. Could it also be a problem? So I would like to invite you to communicate the way you think about this sort of challenge as well. So, Sir, you're the first, and you can also talk to us about the previous topic.
Thank you. Daniel Bennett with the eCitizen Foundation. And actually, to your point about processing incoming messages, I helped develop the very first two-way internet communication between citizens and members of Congress. And back in '95, that was not a big deal to deal with the email coming in. But today, people who I talk to on the Hill are processing, many more in terms of thousands, and they have some actually excellent technology in Congress. So if people are interested, I can tell them what they're doing. But they have systems to be able to easily process thousands of messages coming in. But I think in terms of talking about the civil discourse and the dialogue with civil society, that there are two things that are fundamental to having that. And one is having an ability to identify or cite or create a citation simply. So if you have every single member of parliament be able to be identified, Daniel Schuman was sort of talking a little bit about that in terms of the bio guide here for the U.S. Congress. But if a person can't, with a simple link in their blog or their Twitter or whatever they're using, make a electronic citation or cite a particular member, a particular vote, a particular part of the law or a pending legislation, you've lost out the ability for them to communicate between themselves and with your parliament. And then the other thing is, very simply, things should be human readable, and part of that means to always document. So just because you put up material, I was looking at Brazil's stuff and they look wonderful, but besides not speaking Portuguese, one of the things I was looking for is documentation, and there was some, but generally that's one thing that it's often easy to leave out, where you know the terminology, you understand the jargon that parliaments work on, but when you create sites, you need, the language that the citizens can understand to help them be able to parse, or not parse XML, but parse the language that they're reading, to be able to understand it and understand what to take back from the data that they're being given. Thanks.
I'm Simon Nichols from the United Kingdom Parliament in London. I had a question and then a subsequent comment. The question was kind of almost answered by Daniel a while back, but I just wanted to push it a little further. Pretty much all the way through the day, people have been talking about the importance of releasing information as quickly as possible, and the phrase "in real time" has been used several times. But you did touch on the potential tension between releasing information quickly and releasing it accurately. Now, my background is that I spent more time than I care to remember dealing with producing transcripts of debates in both houses in the British Parliament. And one thing I can tell you for sure is that in any given day, there will be mistakes in what we release. Most of them will be trivial. Occasionally, they'll be big. Now, if you're taking our daily feed of information and then doing stuff with it, and then a day, 2 days later, we discover something wrong and correct it, as you pointed out, it's difficult for you to know. So I suppose my question is, what do you guys need from us when that happens, as it inevitably will? It might be in a transcript of debate. It might be that we've incorrectly identified somebody as voting this way rather than that way. So, yeah, what is it that you need from us to ensure that, yeah, we've corrected our information, but you need to correct yours as well? And I suppose that the other thing I was going to say, which arose just now really, was about how civil society websites affect parliamentary behaviour. One of the things that we strongly suspect, I think, in our parliament, is that the activity of My Society, and which is excellent in all sorts of ways, and I don't want to disparage it, but some of the things that they do in terms of rating activity levels can have perverse effects on the behaviour of politicians. So the more that they rate how many questions people ask or how often people vote, the more the politicians respond to that by saying, okay, I have to change my behaviour by doing more things, saying more words, making more speeches, asking more questions. And there is a brand of politician that believes that more words equals better scrutiny, and rarely have I come across a more profoundly wrong point of view than that. But that can be one of the perverse effects of giving greater publicity and giving greater accountability to how much our representatives are doing. And I don't think there's an awful lot you can do about that, but it is what it is.
Other comments?
Thanks. I'm Andrew Mandelbaum from the National Democratic Institute. As Dan mentioned previously, we're co-hosting a conference with Sunlight Foundation and several other partners, including the Latin American Legislative Transparency Network at the end of April. And sort of the goal is to sort of have some of these very same discussions among parliamentary monitoring organizations, that's what we call them, PMOs, from around the world, including on sort of, what do PMOs expect, what types of information they expect parliaments to provide and sort of in what formats, and to sort of begin those discussions about what types of document standards and other such things, that they could sort of use and help sort of push this and help other organizations push this internationally, because it is such an important issue. This sort of initiative is, at least for us, is in part based on a study that I conducted of parliamentary monitoring organizations around the world, and I found about 190 in over 80 countries doing this type of work. And some organizations are developing sort of technology tools like the two before you. Many others are sort of are not doing that at all. They might help members of parliament have discussions with within their constituencies on specific issues with their constituents. There's a range of sort of ways that these types of things are done. There's a group called PRS Legislative Research in India, which is almost like an external congressional research service, and they do a lot of sort of analyses of legislation, nonpartisan analyses, and they do a lot of work directly for MPs who don't have access to that from the legislature itself. So, many of these organizations are doing really fantastic work, and there hasn't been very many opportunities to share the good practices. So that's sort of part of what this is about. In terms of, the relationships between these organizations and parliaments, I found, generally speaking, that everybody has their own biases. For MPs, they often don't care about sort of activity levels and things like that until they read about them in the newspapers, even though lots of organizations try to engage MPs in their work prior to publishing. For PMOs, many individuals come from civil society in places where they haven't had access to information, and there's a strong sense, I think, among the citizenry more broadly, that there's, conflicts of interest and corruption and the use of power for private gain. So those are some of the sort of issues that we're hoping to work on. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam?
Yes. Ann Washington, George Mason University. This morning we touched on a little bit about the problems of secondary sources. And I think I want to bring up the point that this is political information, and so there are people who take strong sides on it. And I wanted to know your thoughts about how you handle the possible conflicts around that, and how do you portray yourselves as not just civil society organizations, but civil society organizations that are operating in a nonpartisan way and with good faith. And maybe that can tie into discussing how you're funded or how you go about making sure that the information you're providing is nonpartisan.
One last intervention from the room. Yes, sir.
I'm Jim Cabral from OASIS. For those of you who are not familiar with OASIS, OASIS is an internationally recognized standards body, including member sections for legal XML, electronic government. It's also developed elections and voter services standards as well in this space. I just want to put a plug into, there was a question about, where should we be developing these standards? I believe that the place to develop open standards is in an open forum where academics, public sector, private sector, citizens, individuals, citizens, all have the ability to participate or at least respond to a public review process. And when I said this is a plug, tomorrow Monica Pomerani is going to be introducing you to the latest work in this area that's happening within the OASIS Legal XML member section, and inviting you to participate in that work if you'd like to. So that'll be in the technical track tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you very much, James. So maybe we can offer a last chance to our two speakers to comment and answer some of the question, and then we will conclude this panel, this session, to go for a coffee. So,
Okay.
Daniel?
So, Simon, you had two questions, or it was a question and a bit of a comment, I guess. The question was, if there are changes in the data, how do you tell people using it? And I'm an attorney, not a programmer, but I understand that people just use a change log, which is a way of identifying changes as they go through. So if something changes from one iteration to the next, you have a list saying, hey, this information over here has changed. And that's a pretty standard practice. Now, as for civil society websites having an effect on parliamentary behavior, and particularly perverse effects, I mean, there's nothing that people like more in their legislators than perversion. So as we, I guess puns don't work here. Okay, for one person anyway. That's true for anything, right? Putting TVs in, allowing reporters in, right? Anything that doesn't happen under dark of night is going to lead to perverse effects, and doing things under dark of night is going to lead people to draw the worst conclusion. So no matter, you're sort of damned no matter what you do. The question is, knowing that there's always going to be perverse effects, what, from a parliamentary perspective, is the best thing that you can do? And the best thing that you can do is make sure that you give as much information and as much context as quickly and as accurately as possible so that people can draw their own conclusions. Now, maybe there's a very, U.S. terms, a very right-wing website that goes and portrays information one way and a very left-wing one that has it another way. So be it. I mean, that's the nature of the parliamentary discussion. I mean, you know, the Guardian and the Times don't agree on most things either, even though they're coming from the same information as well. What I think is most important is that the underlying data is available so that people can go to the primary source and draw their own conclusions. Now, there's always going to be strange effects, and sometimes good effects. You know, when you measure attendance, as was, I can't remember what South American country was doing, they started to measure attendance at parliamentary sessions, and all of a sudden the attendance, you know, went up significantly. Well, that, you know, assuming that attendance is a proxy for actually, you know, doing your job, then that's a good thing. If attendance means that you're just showing up on TV and not doing anything, then it's a bad thing. I mean, these things are ultimately these resolve in sort of political science questions that are difficult to answer. But what's relatively easy to address is that more information, as a general rule, is better because it allows people to at least have the opportunity to make better judgments. Now, Anne had a question about, well, actually, my handwriting's kind of terrible. It had to do with secondary sources, political information. Oh, why should anybody trust sunlight, basically? Is that, I think that's a fair summary.
That would be one interpretation.
Or any of us, right? So the first question is, well, if you want to see how we spend all of our money and where we get all of our funding, it's on our website. It's up there since we were founded in 2006, or whatever year it was. I think it was 2006. So you can see every amount that we've received over, I think, $500, from grants of $500 to grants of, you know, a couple $1 million, and the same way in reverse. So that's certainly one way to try to assess where we come from. Another is by looking at who we work with. And I would suggest this with any organization. If, you know, but most importantly, I think, is the best way to assess biases is to judge us or judge any PMO by what we do. If what we do seems to be biased, then, well, you know, probably a good reason to believe that. Is this a symbol to wrap up? I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be brief because I think everybody's waiting for the coffee. I have the feeling that there is this fear of what I would call feedback overload for the members of the parliament, that if there is a lot of information there available about their activity, also the citizens will have something to say about it, which may be the case, but I don't think this is a real danger, and I don't think this is an argument. Once you have taken up the role of an elected official, this is something that you would expect, and I would actually say that parliamentarians should be glad that there is that the citizens are informed about their activity. Of course, that means also that you have to have the staff sufficiently numerous and prepared to be able to synthesize this information, but we know that democracy is not something which is not expensive. We know that that is expensive, but it's the best system that we know. This is how it is. How to correct the errors if the parliament makes an error and then they correct it? I think this is not something very difficult. The parliaments, in these cases, they just need to send a flag or an email flagging that they have corrected the information meanwhile, and that civil society organization reporting on that information should also do it. In our case, for example, we are not signaled this by the European Parliament, but we correct this, we compensate for this by reprocessing the minutes of the meetings 3 times. So we do it once right after the votes, second time after a few days, and thirdly after several weeks once the minutes have been finalized. With regard to the question of how reporting on the activity influences the behavior of the parliamentarians, yes, it is true. There is a certain influence. I can say for sure from our measurements that in those countries where media reports of activities and attendance in the European Parliament have been more numerous, also the activity of those MEPs has increased, meaning that they have started to become more present in the European Parliament. And as I said, the advantage that we have is that we can monitor 27 member states and we can monitor the behavior in all of these. We also have a media monitoring report. We have a sort of Google alerts in which we detect what are the media pieces that appear in each of these countries, and then we monitor to see what is the behavior of those MEPs. Yes, wherever there is a high media coverage, there is an increase in the level of attendance of the MEPs. Now, whether this is something positive or not, I wouldn't say, of course, that being more present also means that they do more or better work, but it definitely doesn't hurt to be there. If ranking the number of speeches, yes, I think this is something which is questionable, but it depends a lot on how you report this. So we, for example, we don't make a lot of noise on the number of the speeches. If someone wants to do that, then that's their job. How we stay non-political. I think there are 2 types of civil society organizations that monitor the work of the parliaments. Some organizations are militant, some organizations are non-militant. We are not militant in the sense that we only provide information without too much editing or nothing at all. We don't say why the members of the parliament voted a way or another, or whether it is good or bad that they voted one or another. We provide this information, however, for those militant civil society organizations that can interpreted this information, saying that this is against, I don't know, against environment or against gender equality or whatever. It is up to them, for this second category of civil society organization who are militant, to interpret this information and communicate this further to their members. And I think this is how it should be, a conjunction of the efforts between non-political organizations and then the political organization, because they help everyone communicate the message to their members. Thank you.
Thank you. So, in case you're like me still wondering what you meant when you say that you figure a way to dispose of thousands of email, I hope it's not the approach I am thinking of.
No, it's not the circular file.
In your name, I would like to thank the U.S. House of Representatives, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, the United Nations for setting up this very nice meeting for all of us. I would like also to thank our 2 speakers who were very interesting and very relevant. And I would like to thank you all for your interesting question and comments. So I think with a round of applause for our speakers, we'll be ready to go for coffee.
Two short messages. One, we anticipated the need of electricity, so there are plugs at the corner. There is a table with plugs for whoever wants to recharge the battery of the laptop or any other device you are carrying.
I found some under the desk too. If you're
yes.
ready to go under the desk, they are.
As well. And then, since we start knowing each other, but this will be facilitated by if you pick your nameplate when you come back from coffee, so it will be easier for people to recognize you. Some of you have done it. Thank you. So, thank you.